Hey, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining TAGG Magazine today for our By the Way panel discussion, which we will be chatting about being a bisexual woman in the queer community, definitely with a focus on the queer women's community. I'm super excited to have this conversation. It is definitely long overdue. But a couple of things before we get the conversation started. For those who don't know, my name is Eboné Bell. I am the editor-in-chief of TAGG Magazine. We are a print publication, website, podcast show for everything lesbian, queer, and under the rainbow. So that's who I am. I do identify as a lesbian or queer, and that's important that I say that because I'm here to moderate, ask questions, and listen. Just like everybody out there watching right now. And speaking of, if you do have questions or comments along the way, you can just comment right there on our Facebook comments for the video. If you're watching live on YouTube, you can also comment there or ask questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we possibly can. So without further ado, I have a wonderful panel that I'm super excited to have this conversation with. They all identify as bisexual women, and it should be noted that they are not speaking for the entire bisexual community. I do not want to get those emails from people. They are speaking from their own experience, their own opinions, and I know it's going to be great. So we have three panelists. We have Dr. LaNail Plummer. Some of you might remember her from the conversation we had about a month ago on self-care in the Black queer community. If you haven't seen that, go back to our Facebook or our YouTube. Fantastic conversation. And we have two of TAGG Magazine's writers. We have Vickey Casey and Rebecca Gunter. I'm going to let you all take a few seconds to tell us a little bit more about yourselves before we jump into this. So LaNail, if you want to start, go for it.
Absolutely. I noticed that you highlighted Vickey and Rebecca as writers, but I was an Enterprise Woman of the Year. Doesn't that count for
Come on.
Come on, Eboné. About me. I have a connection too. Come on, Eboné.
My bad.
Nonetheless, my name is Dr. LaNail Plummer. I am a professional counselor here in Washington, D.C. and licensed in both D.C. and Maryland. I'm also the CEO and the owner of Onyx Therapy Group, which is a mental health company that has 8 offices in 3 states, and we specialize in mental health services as well as training and education. One of our primary populations that we work with are members of the LGBTQ community. As I proudly highlight my identity as a bisexual woman, I am part of the B in the LGBTQ. I'm also faculty at Johns Hopkins University, and I'm helping to write my first book. I'm writing a couple chapters in a book, and I'm a mom. I have a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old. So the whole bisexual experience hits home a little differently when you got kids with you, right? Like, and you got to navigate their experiences too. So I hope that we get an opportunity to talk about that. I'm married to my beautiful wife, Megan, and that is also an element that we get to talk about today. So I'm happy to be here today, super excited about this platform, have been talking about it 100% to everybody because it's extremely important to me that bisexual people are highlighted within our community. So thank you for having me here, Eboné.
Yeah, absolutely. Vickey?
Hi, everyone. My name is Vickey Casey. I am one of the writers with TAGG Magazine. You've probably seen me pop up here and there. I'm a technical writer at the FDA, and I'm an assistant professor of photo and video storytelling at Georgetown. And I am extremely excited to be on this panel and learn and listen and share.
Awesome. And Rebecca?
Follow that, right? Gee. Hey, everybody. I'm Rebecca Gunter, 25 years in the DMV, 23 of those in DC, and now live a sleepy little life in Edgewater, Maryland. I'm the mom to a very out queer 12-year-old daughter, which I raised with my husband. And professionally, I'm a brand strategist, a marketing person, and a copywriter. So I have been able to use that voice at TAGG, which has been extremely cool. And I'm excited to explore this conversation as well, because it's one of my favorite topics.
Awesome. Yeah, we have
Thanks for having me. Oh, sorry. And thanks for having me.
Of course. Anytime. I'm super excited. Thank you for having us. So I appreciate it. So let's just start with the quintessential question of how did you, and this is a question for everyone. When did you know, how did you know that you were a bisexual woman?
I'll start.
Go ahead, Rebecca. Go ahead.
All right.
Okay, I'll kick it off. I probably should have known when I was like 12 or 13 and I was practicing making out with like neighborhood girls. So that should have been a clue. But I honestly didn't really discover the fruition of my attraction to women as well as men when I was about 20, 21 years old. So making out with a girl in the parking lot and feeling all those unbelievable butterflies that I hadn't felt with anybody else before pretty much put the sign the ink on the document, shall we say. And I've been living with that level of freedom of expression ever since.
Awesome.
All right. I can go next. I went to boarding school for high school, an all-girls boarding school. So I was surrounded by women, well, I guess other teenagers, all day, every day. And I had this really fun opportunity to go with my friends to a sleepover for a long weekend. And teenagers being teenagers, you know, we found the bottle somewhere, and I kissed my first girl and went, this is actually kind of nice. And then as I, you know, hindsight's 20/20, and I really should have figured it out when I was like 7, you know. Because, you know, there were all these boys that were cute, but then there were all of these girls that were also really, really cute. And no one else around me seemed to be going through this tug of war. And then in high school, I met a bi person that told me they were bi, and I went, eureka moment. I know what this is. I finally have a name for who I am. And many years later, you know, still going, and
here we are.
And here we are on this awesome panel.
I love that it's sleepover. I feel like sleepover camps, that's like always where these things happen. So shout out to whoever that sleepover friend.
I still love sleepovers. I'm a big advocate for sleepovers. So I don't think those should be done by the time you're out of high school.
No,
I agree.
Vicky,
I love a good pajama party.
Vicky, it's so funny you mentioned the
virtual sleepover.
Oh, we could. Vicky, it's funny
I'm
that
sorry,
you
LaNail, go ahead.
Because as soon as you said sleepover, I had an image to my sleepover, one of my sleepovers, and I was like, aha, okay, that's how it works. So I was a relatively young girl. I was about 7. I am extreme. I've always been like super self-aware of who I am, but also where I fit into places. Which was interesting because at 7 years old, I was like, there's something different about me, right? And I wasn't completely turned off by guys, but I also had a very strong inclination to women, to girls, right? So I was like, what does this mean? Because my mother eventually was very active in the church, I didn't have a place to actually say where I was. And I am very spiritually inclined, so I didn't know how that like added into these concepts of like heaven and hell and things like that, where I was like, well, the straights get to go to heaven, but the gays go to hell. And so like, what is happening here, right? So I was trying to figure that out in my young adult years, in my adolescence years. But I knew at about 7 that I had an inclination towards girls and towards guys. But interestingly enough, although it seems like based off of our panel, I probably knew very early, I actually didn't come out until about 6 years ago. So my story, I spent most of my life in a closet, and then hopefully, Eboné, we could talk about that in details, because coming into the LGBTQ community, I went back into the closet, right, as a bisexual person, in that I had to kind of suppress the attraction to men that wasn't embraced by, the lesbians in my life. But for me, I knew at about 7 years old, and so as a mental health professional, when people say kids don't know, and we're pushing sexuality on them, it's not sexuality we're pushing, we're allowing them space for attraction, which is very different than sex, right? So for me, I was a young girl, and then went through adolescence, with experiences, isn't that what we call it? Like experiences and fun time. And then in my 30s is when I say, you know what, 2 tears in a bucket, the world needs to know who I am fully.
That's
What's
awesome.
2 tears in a bucket mean?
Well, I'm going to say the rest of it offline, but it's 2 tears in a bucket, blanket. Yeah.
Oh, I'm stealing that. That's the name of that's my memoir.
It rhymes with bucket.
That's the name of my new memoir for sure.
That's fantastic.
So LaNail, let's jump into this question. Because a lot of times when we have those experiences, we always say, oh, this person is curious or bi-curious. What is the difference between curiosity and identity?
Yeah, absolutely. So curiosity is a matter of being in an exploration phase, right? Like, so you're trying this and you're trying that, and you wonder about this and you wonder how you fit in here and you wonder how you fit in there. Identity is around the solidification of that, right? So after you've tried whatever you need to try, you then associate with it. And keep in mind, everybody has different variances of trying, right? Some people don't have to try. Interestingly enough, we often use this term trying with people who are trying to be a part of the LGBTQ community. We don't use that same terminology for heterosexuals. We don't say, were you trying to be straight? You know what I mean? Or, did you try to be with this person? We often use that term when we're talking about the LGBTQ populations. But the difference is around the phases of curiosity and exploration versus the solidification of identity and proudness in walking into who I am. So this is who I am, and I cannot be questioned because I am sure and confident of my identity.
Yeah. Did anybody else want to jump in? No pressure.
And I think one of the issues is that for a lot of people, sexuality and attraction are very fixed, and they're fixed around physical attributes like genitalia, and sometimes presentation. And for a bi person, it isn't. Bi people might not necessarily be confined to those specific physical attributes. So when while you're curious and exploring, those are people who are trying to figure out exactly who it is and what it is about who it is that they like, and then you arrive at identity. But that exploration, people make things either very easy for themselves or difficult for themselves or others around them. So, a lot of the stigmas that I think we've encountered or others have encountered are because of the after effects of some of that exploration and people growing and maturing. It's as you grow and mature within yourself, you might not leave the best impression on the people that you've come in contact with, and that doesn't just go for bi people, that goes for everyone.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Want to give a shout out to Eva, by the way, who's watching and said, thank you for doing this and speaking your truth. Wish there was more community and support to know who we are. Awesome. Thanks, Eva. Rebecca, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, I just think we're all a little gay. And if you like it, and stick with it. And if you don't like it, then don't. And I think it's a human quality to want to put a label on everything, but I also think that we're human beings who have sexual expression. Some I understand, some people do not, but in general, human beings have a sexual expression, and who that is, really depends on just what you're into, and try it, like it, stick with it. Don't do it anymore.
Yeah, definitely. All great points, by the way. So let's just jump into this real quick. So I know that we see a lot of celebrities who come out as bisexual, and many of them are in relationships with men, which makes me wonder if some of this relates to a study that was done in 2018, where they found out that lesbians and gay men alike see bisexual women more attracted to men. Why do you think this is?
Oh, there's so much more available.
I mean, that makes sense.
I mean, they're just more available. And then if you've ever tried to, as a bi woman, gone out and tried to find someone to go out on a date with, it's like a needle in a haystack, but you can't throw a stick without hitting a guy. And there's just a supply and demand, and then, social stigma on top of it. So the kind of exclusion of being with, lesbian women, the kind of exclusion of that, you're either a bug, you're bisexual till graduation, or you're just like, that's what you say when you get drunk, or like, that's your pathway, but you're going to end up with a man anyway. Like, although who gives a crap what you do with your life as long as you're happy? But I just think men are just ubiquitously more available. And so that stigma of like, we like men more, there just happen to be more of them that are available for dating, etc.
Rebecca, you're gonna have all these straight women coming for us, right? Because I'm not sure if they all think that there's men available, right? I look at some of my straight girlfriends and my straight homegirls rather, and they're like, "There's no men out here." What is going on here? My thought around it is that that study is really a manifestation of socialization, of stigma. And Eboné, we don't, Eboné, Vickey, Rebecca, we don't have to go into the implicit biases that are connected to publications, but even publications are political, right? So what gets published is based off of the political agenda of the publishing house, right? And so that study was able to be produced because the publishing company felt that was one that was worth producing. But my thought around it is a couple different factors. Many people still think that bisexuality is a phase. They think that, we're curious as opposed to this is our identity. And so, yes, you were once with women, but now you're with men. And so that makes sense. And that makes sense only for socialization because, socialization tells us that women should be with men, and anything contrary to that is a disorder. In fact, up until I think 1977, homosexuality was considered a disorder in the DSM. In the DSM-2, right? And so it's still that socialization piece that says women should still be and attracted to men. So if you are bi, that's great. That's who you get to have romantic and intimate and sexual experiences with, but whom you marry will probably be a man because that's what we want of you. And then the last piece is that men tend to be more accepting of bisexual women than women are accepting of bisexual women. Men, and there's different elements to that, right? Men don't always feel threatened by women, just again, because their level of socialization. So you could be with a woman, but she's not me, right? So she's not going to take my place. So there's that element. The other element is you could be with a woman, but I want to be invited into the situation, right? So there's a whole element of what our movie out in terms of sexual interactions between lesbian and bisexual women. But then there's also the piece that many lesbians don't always feel comfortable with bisexual women. And so they're more likely to say, I don't deal with bisexual women, versus a man saying, I don't deal with bisexual women. So where do you fit in, right? Like, where are you going to have the least tension and the least complications? It may possibly be with a man once you are solidified in your bisexual identity.
So why do you think that some queer, and I want to make sure I say some queer women do not date bisexual women? You know, they'll say it out loud. And, you know, I've had a lot to learn as I've grown in this community. When I was younger, I was one of those people that said that. But I realized that that was my own experiences that I was putting on other people. So why do you think that some queer women are like, no thanks?
Are you asking me personally or the group?
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Any of you, Vickey, if you want to step in, but anyone can answer this question. Apologies.
I think for me, in my experience, you hit the nail on the head with it, Eboné. A lot of it is past experiences with people who maybe, you know, outside of their bisexuality, the way that they moved in relationships was not very healthy for themselves, their partner, or their relationship. They might have been in the curiosity stage of their, you know, their bisexuality, and might have been dating multiple people of different genders, and one of those people was unhappy that they are competing with a cis man, or someone who appears to be a cisgendered man. And I think the one I've heard the most has been, well, bi people are cheaters, and often the worry is that the cheating will be with the man, and somehow that's worse than being cheated on with another woman.
It's terribly confusing to me, Vickey. I'm still confused by it.
I don't quite understand it. And I've had these conversations enough times to kind of point out that cheating and your sexual identity are not mutually exclusive. Someone who's going to cheat in a relationship would have done that with the person on the left that they're dating, or the person on the right. And I guess it's just fear, because there isn't any other there are very few other situations where within the community this blanket is put on a specific identity, because everyone in all of the letters, there's someone in all of the letters who has been unfaithful to their partner or spouse or whomever, and somehow they keep dating. Mm-hmm. But when a bi person, you know, is open about their bisexuality, tells them right away, then there's an immediate, oh no, not you, because you're definitely gonna do it. Mm-hmm. Instead of kind of reflecting on that past trauma and, you know, working through it and looking at this whole new person as a whole new person in a whole new relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Rebecca?
I think loyalty gets called into question. I think that people that, for, you know, as we're talking specifically about why lesbian women will not date bi women, I think that there is a fear or a mistrust that your loyalty to the community is fake or appropriated, or put on, and that you feel and that you can leave that community and safely like walk down the street as a cis straight person with your boyfriend anytime, and you haven't struggled with the same level of, you know, kind of oppression and you know, as much stigma, because it's so easy to just kind of, you know, code switch back and forth between two very different, you know, very binary worlds. So for the people who, you know, kind of like live and die by the civil rights aspect of it and the kind of for us, by us aspect of it, I think bi women represent a threat to that as being, you know, almost like, again, almost appropriation in a way, and the loyalty to the community is called into question, and your integrity is also called into question, because it's, you can live the easy road like that, and that seems unfair somehow.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. LaNail, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I did. I think that that it still kind of goes back to how people perceive bisexual people, right? Like there's twofold. There's one about who are you as a person, and then there's a second in terms of who am I as a person. And because bisexual people are still kind of identified as those who are confused about themselves, or those who are actually bisexual as a traumatic experience based off of a heterosexual encounter that wasn't positive, right? So like it didn't work out with men, and so subsequently you're bi, right? Like, and when we think about that as a traumatic response, then the thought is, well, once you're healed, you're going to go back to men, and you're kind of just using me in this moment, right? And it also has to do with who the responsive person is in the other person in the relationship, especially lesbian women who have gone through a significant amount of experiences and some traumatic experiences to lesbian, and then they think bisexual people get the easy way out, right? Because what they're talking about is passing privilege. They're not talking about bisexuality, but because they don't know the difference between the two terms, they use them interchangeably and think, you know, you get the easy way out, I have to fight my way through, we don't have the same similarities. Our culture also doesn't allow for gray space. Think about people who are biracial. You are Black or you are white. You are Black or you are Asian. We don't allow for this mix in between, right? Like we're not a society that does well with gray. And so bisexual folks get to sit in the position of gray. And then the last piece, I mean, I have many pieces, but the last piece is around masculinity and femininity, right? So a very masculine, centered woman could feel comfortable in her masculinity, but still wonder if that bisexual woman needs a different level of masculinity, which causes that person to have insecurity. And so instead of facing their own insecurity, instead of doing the work around who they are and how they identify, they'd rather project it on the bisexual person and say subsequently, I need to avoid you, because the presence of you makes me feel insecure. The presence of you makes me question my masculinity and if I am good enough, right? The presence of you makes me wonder if you can be committed, or rather, can I be committed? So I think it's really a matter of the two people, how they perceive each other. But the most important point, as you talked about your first question, is that bisexual person actually bisexual by identity, or are they curious? Because a whole bunch of these curious people are messing it up for bisexual people, right? They use the term bisexual when you know good and well you heterosexual and you just want to see what a little thing is like, right? And so, but you mess it up for everybody else when you use the term bisexual, because I am bisexual, but if you out here just playing games, I can't date who you just dated because they're going to perceive that me and you are the same. So it's also how heterosexual people misinterpret and misuse or even appropriate the word bisexuality when it's actually not their experience, it's their escape from maybe something traumatic or their curiosity around something that they have yet to explore.
Right. And you brought up a lot of good tidbits right now. So one of the things that stands out for me the most, because I'm a masculine center woman, is second guessing or questioning, okay, is this person with me because I present like a man, and they want to be with a man, and they're just, you know what I mean? Like, I've thought that in the past, and it's really interesting that you say that. But again, it goes back to your own stuff that has nothing to do with that person or that individual. Really quick, I wanted to make sure I put this up. Is it coming up? Maya says, it's very confusing. The dynamic that folks make between the dynamic and sexuality. Fear of bisexuality is rooted in toxic monogamy.
Yeah, I agree. Not just toxic monogamy, but toxic masculinity too, right? Because let's be real, Ebony, who are masculine also have toxic masculinity. Like, we cannot pretend that just because one is a woman, toxic masculinity doesn't apply to them. But yes, in our culture, we do have a very strong connection to monogamy. I think a lot of that also has to do with what our experiences are when we're looking at the Abrahamic religions, right? So when we're looking at Islam, Christianity, Judaism, which are mostly centered around monogamy, even as the Islamic religion that has a different connection to it. So when you're bisexual, there's this idea that you cannot be monogamous in one area because you have an attraction in another area. So there's this idea that you must be fulfilled both in with men and with women, which is not accurate at all from bisexual experiences. And most bisexual people will tell you that that's actually not what happens with us. But that's the perception that we cannot commit to monogamy because we must also have this other one half of ourselves to be filled, which it doesn't happen that way for us. But for me, rather. But I'll let Vickey and Rebecca speak, and all others who also identify as bisexual.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
Yeah. Okay. Well, one, I just really want to appreciate how you brought up the gray areas of living in these kind of gray areas, and how our just socially our binary construct doesn't let us do that. So I really appreciate that is like, who cares? Who cares if I date a man now and a woman next time, and then have another girlfriend and then have a boy? It doesn't matter to anybody other than me. And so living in that gray area, I just wish was a little bit more appreciated, because it is a bummer that we have to silo ourselves under these, very strict labels for fear, again, for other people's insecurities and for fear. I can be attracted to more than one woman, and that doesn't mean I'm a cheater. I can be attracted to men and women. That doesn't mean that I can't live a fulfilled life with one or the other. It just depends on who I'm vibing with right then and there.
Yeah.
And for many people, or for those who practice it, ethical non-monogamy exists, and it's a lot of people find it very healthy, and if that is something that works for that couple or group, then that's a good way to kind of break out of the toxic monogamy. I guess, to me, somewhat unhealthy way that it's kind of been pushed onto by people is this concept of the unicorn, specifically for hetero normative couples, where they think that this bi person is seeking that fulfillment from both sides, like you were saying, Dr. Plummer. And so they'll seek out or want to be found and then brought into a relationship and can get both sides fulfilled. But unless a bi person is actively seeking this kind of relationship or entanglement, one of our 2020 words of the summer, it isn't appealing and it isn't cute to have this, for those of us who've spent time on the apps, you see this person that you find attractive, You hit them up, all of a sudden they slide in, well, me and my insert husband, boyfriend, other partner think you're cute too. And it's like, well, I didn't ask for that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's fetish. I think it's fetishizing.
It is. Yeah, it is. It is.
So really quickly, I want to make sure we have comments and questions, and I want to just shout out people real quick before we dive into kind of coming out by and then being bisexual in your relationships. Annie, great question. I'm going to actually ask that question at the end. It's actually a perfect question to end with. And then, I'm going to butcher this. Lincino Chinchilla says, also, there's the misunderstanding that bi people need to be with both men and women, when actually they are happy with either men or women in a monogamous relationship. So I think people are getting a lot of things out of this. So thank you guys. Keep the comments and questions going. So I think LaNail brought it up about passing. You brought so many great topics up. I don't want to assume, but I think you all identify or you are feminine of center, right? So you can pass for a straight woman. How often do you see yourself having to come out in personal relationships, professional relationships, or do you just not at all? Because it doesn't matter. Like, what's your experience with that?
I come out all the time. I come out all the time, Ebony. I clearly had a big coming out experience, if you will, but because of my presentation and the way that I carry myself in terms of what people think they know about me, right? They're very much like, oh, she's femme and she must be with a guy. And it's ridiculous the amount of comments that come in, not just from men, but from women, not just from the hetero community, but the same-sex community too, in that, how's your husband? Where's your husband? And it makes it even more complicated because I have children that I had prior to coming out. And so there is a man in our world, if you will, being the kid's father, but not necessarily my husband. But I find myself often having to say something like, even when I introduce myself, I think I said something about, and I have my wife, right? Like, that is what my coming out sounds like frequently, like, and this is my wife. And if I'm teaching my students, and I may have to say something like, this is my wife. And part of that coming out is also because I want to prevent people from saying something ignorant and then having to correct them, right? So let me tell you ahead of time that this is who I am, and this is how I identify, so that you don't say something ridiculous, and then we have to spend time unpacking your biases, right? And so I come out frequently. And I think my kids, although they are heterosexuals, and they, I think that they come out often also, right? Like, they make the distinction between who they are and the distinction between who I am. So they'll often talk about my mom and my stepmom, or my mom and my mom's wife, just again to make it clear to people that we are a family that is led by a same-sex couple.
Sure. Vickey or Rebecca, do you want to speak on your coming out experience?
Go ahead, girl.
Okay. I think it usually happens in conversations, right? Because because being in female-centered spaces is more comfortable, because gonna make a blanket statement here. Bars and clubs with lots of men, not always very fun because of things like toxic masculinity. So because I spend so much time with queer women at events, we're at League or XX Plus or any the TAGG events, there are a lot of assumptions about, the same with Dr. Plummer. A lot of assumptions are made because I am feminine presenting, and I the majority of the people I've dated, including my girlfriend, are either masculine presenting or kind of leaning more towards a masculine presentation. So a lot of people would just assume, and it's kind of up to me, kind of reading the room, whether or not I feel like having that conversation that day, or whether or not I feel like making the correction that day. And it's sometimes there might be someone who might know me a little bit better and say, "Wait, are we all lesbians here?" Or, you know, does anyone identify differently? And then I'll say, "Oh, actually, I do." Or, you know, some situations where I'll just do that myself, and, you know, be able to provide a perspective from a perspective from a bisexual person. So it's less so now since COVID has kept me home and canceled it. Yeah, and yeah, so it's mostly just been in conversations with people who probably just made an assumption, and then either I or someone else will ask to make sure, because thankfully the people I spend time with are very conscious, so that's helpful.
Yeah. I also wonder if you feel safe, depending on this the environment that you're in, if that makes any sense. Like, you know, like for me, I always joke, like when I walk in a room, like I'm a walking gay poster, right? I feel like I usually don't have to come out. But I know for feminine presenting women, I wonder if safety is also an issue, and maybe not. But as you were talking, Vickey, it's just something that came to mind. If Rebecca, if you want to jump in at all.
Sure.
You don't have to.
No, it's I really want to tell my coming out story as it relates to my kid, which was actually hilarious. So I'm just me, like just living my life as me. Most of my friends know that I'm a very open, fluidly sexual person, and I could be crushing on just about anybody in the room. But as I shared before, my daughter's extremely out. She's never been in a closet. She's very proudly announced her associations, her affiliations with the community, and she was very up, you know, in defensive mode, you know, one day in the car, like, "Mom, you just have no idea what it's like. You have no idea what it's like to be part of the queer community if you're lesbian." And I said, "Well, actually, I've identified as bisexual since I was about 21 years old, and if you could have dropped it, you could have heard a pin drop." She's like, so sometimes it becomes, you know, it's not, I never really would feel unsafe coming out. I just am myself, and sometimes people are shocked, like my own kid who was like, "What? Mama's cool? Who knew?" Anyway, that's really a coming out story in reverse.
Yeah.
From mother to kid.
Happening. So really quickly, Sarah Macy says, "Lots of us bi folks love on non-binary and trans folks too." That is a very good point. Thank you, Sarah, and hello. So hey, how
yeah, I know, Sarah.
Does your bisexuality show up in your relationships? I know two of you are in relationships with queer women. Rebecca, you said you have a husband. How does that show up? Have there been any hurdles, discussions? Does your partner not want you to come out as bisexual when you guys are out?
Not.
Like,
not really. He does not. He doesn't care. He's like super supportive. It's a total non-issue in our household. It's just a total non-issue in my life. Like, I'm happy that it's around because I do like the buffet that's in front of me. It's just a non-issue. Like, he knows I'm into girls and have had relationships with girls in the past, and it's just never a thing.
Sure. And I remember earlier we were talking about how men seem to be a little bit more accepting. Again, I'm not saying all, but it's interesting that you say that because it brings me back to that conversation. But yeah,
I'm sorry. I just want to say, like, I think jealousy is just insecurity, and he's not insecure. So he doesn't like steep in toxic masculinity. He's not insecure about it. If I'm crushing on a girl, or remembering a great crush on a girl, that's not an affront to his ego in any kind of way. So I'm living the dream in that way, I guess.
Yeah. Insecurity. I mean, that's a huge thing. Security versus insecurity. LaNail, how does it show up in your marriage?
Absolutely. To go back to what Rebecca said a second ago and tie it into what I was saying earlier, I do indeed believe that men tend to be more accepting. And although I do believe that the crux of a lot of this has to do with security, I think it also has to do with socialization, in that men just don't feel they need to compete with a woman, right? So you can be in love or attracted to a woman, but she is nothing in comparison to me, which is also where I see how men fit into the equation when it comes to bisexual women. In terms of safety, I don't know if I always feel safe. You know what I mean? I think you guys have all seen my personality over the last 45 minutes, and I'm very bubbly and I'm very upfront and I'm very direct. But I do, like Vickey said, find a lot of comfort in being with women, whether it's socially or professionally, but still it burns a little bit when lesbian women are not comfortable with my identification of sexuality. In that, because like you mentioned before, Eboné, that they've had traumatic experiences or they had experiences that have turned them off. In relation to my marriage, which is a very vulnerable place for me to talk about, I think that my wife's position on bisexuality is complicated because of her past experiences with bisexual women, right? Where those women, where maybe my wife, being a beautiful and loving person, has fallen in love with someone only for that person to be curious and not bisexual, and subsequently having turned my wife off to the concepts that bisexual women can actually be safe. So there's elements of it where she and I mean, you hear me talk, right? So I'm always engaged in some sort of discourse. So in our discussions together, we're often talking about identity and what that looks like. And I wouldn't say that she's 100% comfortable. Like, if I'm being completely transparent, no, she's not. And part of that has to do with her working through some of her past, or working through what the lesbian community has. There's times where other masculine-centered women have said to her, "You with a bisexual woman, you know you're about to get hurt," right? And they don't even know me, but that's what they like project onto her based off of their experiences, or based off of how bisexual women are marginalized in homosexual and heterosexual communities. And so she has a lot that she has to deal with and process when she decides to marry a bisexual woman. Her strength is that she 100% knew who I was and made a commitment to deal with her issues or her insecurities or her past trauma in marrying me. But I also have to be patient with the fact that at 40 years old and such, she's had experiences that the term bisexual turns her off more than me, LaNail, as a person, turns her off.
Interesting. Yeah, Vickey, how does it show up in your relationship? And listen, I'm not trying to get anybody in trouble here with their significant others.
I am a womanist.
Yes. No, I listen. Now, I really appreciate your honesty. I think it's important because that shows up, I'm sure, for a lot of people. But yeah, Vickey, please.
So what's hilarious is that I had a conversation with my girlfriend about this topic a couple of days ago, because she is comfortable with my bisexuality, has known from day -10, and we were actually sitting and trying to figure out exactly how it is my identity affected the both of us. And we landed at, it didn't really. Except that I'm dating her, it doesn't affect her at all. It's very much if I, go to the doctor and they'll ask, give me your sexual history and find that, from this time to this time and find that it's only women. They won't ask about, any men that have been in my life. So it's, it shows up outside of my relationship more than it shows up within it. And part of that is because, like Rebecca, she doesn't have issues with jealousy. She is, confident within herself and confident that, the term also, like your wife, that she dislikes and the images that she associates with by people don't actually have anything to do with me and who I am. So I think I've lucked out, and I in that sense, because she kind of arrived there before we entered each other's lives. So there wasn't any of this, oh my God, wait, you're bi? Oh, wait, we have to have another conversation and reevaluate whether or not we should be together. It was this, oh, okay, cool. And then when we went from, the various stages of dating each other, she saw that I, as a bisexual person, didn't have a desire to date any other humans that, I encountered. So it wasn't a problem. And I'm very happy and very blessed in that. Because it doesn't really come up unless we're specifically talking about the community and stigmas and the negative experiences that bi people have within the community.
Yeah. So. With that being said, Eboné, if I could interject, I know we're going to go into some questions. I also think that
no, please go ahead.
Part of that also has to do with whom we consistently spend time with, right? So when we're with our friends that are within the LGBTQ community, it's not as much of an issue as when it comes into maybe some of our heterosexual friends. And it's interesting because my wife and I had a conversation recently about the fact that around perception, other people's perceptions of bisexuality and what that means for her in a masculine of center role as a protector, right? So if people are perceiving you this way, how am I to respond? And do I need to be in this position of response and protection, or can it be a conversation that we just don't have? Like, what does that look like? And so it's navigating all the different dynamics. And my wife, as I said, in being transparent, has expressed what her position is, but she also knows that as I continue to advocate around certain populations, she has to be comfortable with what her position is. And so that's why she's going through this process of understanding what does it mean to be bi? What does it mean to be married to somebody that's bi? What does it mean to be bi when you're in a lesbian community versus when you're in a heterosexual community? What does it mean to be bi when you're raising kids? And so I think all of this kind of came onto her at one point. How could she resist me? She couldn't, right? So when she met me, she was like, I love this lady. So yes, your identity, it's whatever, right? But she also had to get comfortable with the fact that there was all this external pressure that we've been talking about for the last 50 minutes around what bisexuality means, and that she wanted to protect me from that. And so it was not always about her and herself, although there's an element of that, but also about her wanting to protect me from the backlash of both communities when one says out loud, I am a bisexual woman. Did that make sense? I hope so. I hope that.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I want to make sure I ask a couple more questions before we leave. If one or two of you can answer, what do you think is one of the biggest, and we probably maybe talked a little bit about it, one of the biggest misconceptions or stigmas related to bisexual women?
That we want everybody. And listen, honey, we don't want you. Okay, so you don't have to worry about that. Like, we want who we are with, and we are very comfortable with whom we are with. But it's this concept that we want everybody and that we can't make our mind up. And not how it is. I think somebody, maybe Rebecca or Vicky said it a second ago, we are 100% comfortable with whom we are with. That the decision has not much to do with sexuality, but more to do with character. So if we break up with you, it's not because you have or do not have a particular genitalia. It's because your character is not aligned with our character, or your personality is not aligned with our personality. It has less to do with what you're working with underneath those little shorts you got on. and just
I feel like we will take that answer for sure. That's a very good point. And I would love for each of you to answer. I want you guys to answer this last question that Annie Brown has. Please, yeah, I think this is a great way to end. What advice would you give to women who think they might be bisexual? Great question, Annie.
I love that question.
Can you guys hear me?
Try it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. My answer is try it. Find a sweet, willing partner that wants to play in the sandbox too, and try it out. If you like it, hooray. If you don't, boo. But I just think life is short, and the buffet is bountiful. So jump in.
Try it out. That's Rebecca's advice. Vicky.
I think
there's nothing wrong.
No, that's fantastic advice, because usually everything will click into place. Either you'll like it or you won't.
You'll know right now. Yeah, exactly. You'll know if you're into it or not.
My advice would be, don't be discouraged by the fact that you might not be able to envision the gender of the person you are spending you might spend the rest of your life with. For me at least, there isn't their silhouette of this figure or this figure, figure with pants or figure with the dress that when I was dating I was just meeting people and figuring out what it was about those people that I liked and I didn't like, and whether or not that, this experience could lead to something else. And really just there will be many, 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 many frogs before you get to the one that turns into your forever person. And don't let the gender of those frogs stop you from, at the very least, having a conversation.
That's great advice.
Ebony, if I can answer real quick, it's been an interesting journey. It's been an interesting journey for me, and of course, this conversation could go on for hours on end, especially when we talk about the personal piece to it. I have a few goddaughters, right, and one of them, a few godchildren, and one of them has been questioning her identity. And one of the things that's important for me in that regard is, if one thinks that they may be bisexual, there's a few elements to consider. One being where you feel the most comfortable, right? The second being what your preferences are in terms of what you feel that you need. Some people need more interaction, more masculinity. Some people need more femininity. Some people need a blend between the both. Where do you feel most connected, right? And connection, again, having to do with the person and the soul and the spirit, and less with the genitalia. But let us not pretend that genitalia does not matter, because it matters. And so what sexual interactions matter to you the most, right? Like, what can you feel like you are 100% comfortable with, and you can maybe add in some things here or take some things out there. But where do you feel the most comfortable when someone is coming to you and presenting themselves to you? And then the ease, right? So the sexuality, the interesting element of the bisexuality is around, the focus tends to be on the sex as opposed to the attraction, or as opposed to the interactions. And I do a lot of work around identity in the community, and it has to do with like attraction and biology and then the sexual element too. But who do you feel most comfortable around? Who do you feel most confident around? Who do you feel most ease around? And you may find that it may not have anything to do with sex, and it just may have to do with that person in general. And then you get to put on a label, because labels are very Western, but you get to put on a label after you know yourself. So I don't think that anybody should be using any of these terms unless they are 100% comfortable with who they are, and it takes some time to kind of figure that out. At 7, I knew I liked girls and I knew I liked guys. I don't know if I would have used the term bisexual. I'd have been like, I'm trying to figure it out, right? And then I figured it out, and to the degree that it made sense for me. So I want people to not feel like you have to know right away. God willing, we will live, for a while, a long time. And so we have time to kind of figure that out. The other element in terms of using God and religion is that do not ever feel ashamed about what you feel inside. Do not ever feel ashamed about your thoughts. Like, you were created to be you on this earth. You were created to have these experiences and to interact with these people. And just because you don't fit into a box doesn't mean that you do not belong. You 100% belong here, and you get to decide how you navigate your experiences, and you get to decide what your purpose is and how that looks. And you get to decide with whom you decide to live that life with. And if it's one partner, great. If it's more than one partner, that's fine too. If it's single, that's fine too. But don't let this society that's very oppressive or your identity as a bisexual person marginalize you. You belong here, and you get to identify how you want to identify, when you want to identify, and with whom you want to identify.
That's perfect. That's a perfect way to end. All three of you had some great advice. Thank you for being here. What I'm really hearing is we need to have a part 2 of this conversation. What I also think would be really interesting, because this has come up a handful of times, is talking about other people's trauma or experience as to why they react a certain way they do to the word bisexual, to bisexual women, whether they're going to date a bisexual woman. I think it'd be really great to bring on people like that to have that conversation. So I hope you guys would come back for that conversation. And yeah, you heard it here first, folks. We're going to have that next month, so look out for that. But thank you all for joining us. Great comments, great questions. Thank you, Vickey. Thank you, LaNail. Thank you, Rebecca. Your insight was fantastic. And let's continue to keep these conversations going. We hope you guys join us next month. We have some really great shows coming up with Ancine. And of course, now we're going to have a bisexual panel part 2. So we look forward to seeing you guys next month. Take care, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.